It's a pleasure having you on board.
Thank you, our host. I just really wanted to start by saying thank you to everyone for joining and supporting my dear sister in this journey. Probably start by saying happy birthday to you, and we celebrate a milestone. And I think normally we celebrate and people have parties, but I think it's really a mark of greatness to celebrate and make an impact to the next generation. So for that, I'm forever grateful. And thank you for that. I think when Ethel was asking about today, and normally Saturday I'm at work or doing something else, don't really sit in the house at 1 o'clock on a Saturday. It doesn't really happen. Probably Ethel can make you do that when you don't choose to do. So I think it's just really the influence and the impact Ethel has got on a lot of people. And I think you can see with the number of people who are gathered today to really kind of maybe get to this place. But I thought about maybe 15 minutes or so to have a conversation. I think when I was asked, I think initially you go to a default position of trying to find some slides, and you put some slides together and you're trying to work through them. And as I always do, I kind of like try to run through things like this with my mother, because my mother keeps me very grounded and she brings me back to where things are. So when I say I put some slides, and she says, "What slides? What are you talking about?" And I tell her about mental health and men, and she says, "Do really men sit and listen to those slides, or do they want to have a conversation?" Then we decided that actually it was better to have a conversation. The men talk better and talk more in a barbershop having a haircut than they talk more in therapy. That's what men do. And I think you'll probably find out on your platform. I'll probably give a guess on how many people are on this platform. We probably have got more females, more women on this platform today, which is a men emitters. And that's what always happens. It's a conversation around how do we get to that place around talking about men and the women who love them. And you always find most of the time that the women who love those men always go that extra mile to try to understand the men they love, less than the men they go out themselves to understand themselves, if it makes sense. So while we're having that conversation with my mother, I think what was very apparent around your international perspective, your national perspective, or your regional or your local one, is the division of the waters. So I want us to have a conversation about the waters, the international waters. Is it black man's curse or is it black man's blessing? I think that's where it was just, because I think when you look at mental health, I think from where I've come from, when you talk about mental illness, you talk about words like madness, which really are not acceptable. I think if we are really going to have a conversation, we need to probably put some house rules out there and say, let's tell ourselves the truth. And it's really about how we can handle the truth. And when you talk about someone being mad in where I come from, the village where I was born, the farm I was born, you're talking about people who are running out there naked. And that's what it means. So it really then starting from this place of strength and the place of weakness at the same time around how the system so much changes, how when you move across the waters from one place of locality to another place which becomes regional, which becomes international, what does that really mean for you as an individual? And actually that change. Where I come from, if you speak to an elder and you look them in the eye, you are told that you are very disrespectful. Where I am now, when you see a sit down, you are being interviewed in a mental health assessment or a police interview, and you don't give eye contact, they say something is wrong with you. So there is a challenge around the roles reversal, roles lost. I think we are coming from a generation, I think, where the understanding of where we are from where we are born in the other side of the waters, it's very different. I think our fathers, the roles were very defined, very clear about what a man is expected to do, what jobs they're supposed to do, what qualifications they're supposed to do, and how their life needs to pan out. And what do they do when they go to work? What do they do when they come back? The whole sense of being a breadwinner, the whole sense of being the head of the family, the whole sense of being a warrior, a king of your own kingdom. So you are coming from that state of a more defined, very clear picture of what that looks like. And then you kind of like land into the other side of the waters where all that is taken away. I come from Zimbabwe, which is the whole country had 2 mental health units, 2 in the whole country. And I sat in London where you are looking at maybe one STP has got 5, 10 mental health units. and you start asking the questions, what has changed? And actually you start really asking some of those questions. And I think the challenge which we've got around now when we land to some of those waters, I think becomes a bigger challenge. Our strength becoming our weakness. Our uncles, I think I remember one of my uncles, when he said that you could hear his ancestors speak. Like everyone who go around them and clap. It was an honor to hear some of those people and say that they hear voices. It was an honor. If he was here and he's talking about hearing his ancestors, you'll be sectioned. So there is that part about like, how do we start understanding and trying to make sense of this man who has been uprooted from everything he's believed and is known into a very different sphere. And like, how do we then support him to start having a different conversation? And the challenge of men in this other side of the waters is we were brought up to be strong. We were brought up to be bold. We were brought up not to be weak. We are brought up not to cry. And when you cry, you go outside and you come back and you hold it together. And you're now expected to cry. You're now expected to do things which you're not used to do. So there is that part about actually, as we really reach into He Matters Global, how do we really start having conversation with the real men? How do we really start touching that real man, that man who struggles to be weak, but actually who needs to be told that it's okay to be weak sometimes. Even strong men cry. And how do we reach to that person who has been brought up all their life to say, actually, you are the breadwinner? And they find themselves in London and realize that they are no longer the breadwinner. Their wife is now making more than they do. And they struggle with that. How do we deal with that man on the other side of the waters, who when things get hard, they go out with their friends and they drink and they come back drunk and they use alcohol to be a tool to tell the truth? And they're in a different space. And I think they wake up the next day, they say it was because of alcohol. But actually it was an opportunity of trying to come into that space of weakness in order to be able to tell the truth. So in that space, until we start understanding that man, we lose that man. And if we're not careful, which is really why I'm quite glad about actually what the Matters it really stands for, is really about actually how do we not lose that man? How do we get that man back? But actually how do we also make sure that we don't lose the next generations? Because it's so easier to lose the next generation because we've lost the previous one. But you have got a group, a bigger group. I think there are different nationalities on this platform. I can speak from the Zimbabwean nationality. And one of the biggest challenges in UK, in the other side of the waters, for the Zimbabwean, is homicide, the number of people who are killing each other in relationships. It's really a terrible, terrible place to be. But actually, it's that whole thing around, actually, when you hear some of those stories, that whole part around the loss of sense of identity, the loss of sense of knowing what's right and what's not right, the loss of sense of control, and how that is really impacting. And actually, the same man doesn't lift their hand and ask for help. And what do you do when you are you are that woman who loves that man, who's not prepared to go out there and ask for help? So there is this part, which I think I was thinking this morning around, as the man struggles with this mental illness in these terrible waters, which divides us. As the man struggles in this space, we start to realize that actually men can agree to have a leg problem. Man has got no issue to have a hand problem. Man has got no issue to have a problem every other part of their body. They can lift their hand and get help. But man has got this understanding that the head is not part of their body. So when it comes to head matters, when it comes to mental health issues, we struggle to be able to go out there and actually look for that help. And the line between being well and not being well is very thin. And the situations around that, where you are in the other side of the waters, becomes more difficult. But I think there is that part around the hope, around actually maybe as we step into this arena and actually starting to have conversations in an area which is probably more relatable. I remember, I think I was in Hertfordshire and we were having this conversation with Ethel at one point around COVID starting, and people were talking a lot more around the well-being and how the well-being was going to support and therapy and IAP, people coming in and having those conversations. And very few Black men went to those conversations because they are not geared that way, because we struggle with actually being able to reach out to things like those IAP. But we are quite good at reaching out to conversations. Ask me to come to go to the barber shop, get me there and have the conversation with me there. So there is something around that as we move across the waters, our conversation with men when it comes to mental health, we need to find them where they are, rather than us still asking them to come where we are. So there is that challenge. But I am really convinced and really, really excited around the speakers which we've got today. Then you also go to the other side around men and mental health, and you start to talk about the shift around the waters, around the religion. And I was taught that actually, if you are religious enough and you become unwell, that means your faith is not strong enough. Then you struggle with that because you have been made to believe that the faith will save you. And then you struggle when the faith is not saving you the way it's supposed to. So you will hear speakers talk about the faith and the impact of mental health. You will hear a lot of discussions. But I think if I can just ask, I think if you remember anything I say this morning, this afternoon, I think it's just really, I think as we pause to engage with men around their mental health, let's not judge them. Let's find them where they are. And I urge our sisters who are on this call that you continue to love them. You continue to support them. Because I think it is sometimes because through that love that you are able to get them on the other side. People are loved not because they are good, but people are good because they are